Yo, what's good? Here's the difference just 3 compressors can make on a mix. And all I've done here is add compressors to the vocal chops, piano, and drum bus. I've been making music for over 10 years now, and I was always someone who just understood like the basics of compression, but I never really got into it on a deeper level. But in the past year, I feel like I've really gotten a better understanding of what's really going on inside of a compressor, and it's made my mixes so much better. Like there's this function called the knee that most people don't even really pay attention to, but I actually think it's the most useful part of the whole compressor. So first, let's do an overview of exactly what all these knobs do, and then we'll actually go in and do some examples like a piano, drum bus, and vocal chops. Go tell your lover. That way you can understand how to really approach different sounds. A compressor is just a fancy way to change the volume of a sound. That's all it's doing. It's just changing the volume in different ways. At the most basic level, it's used to even out the volume between a quiet sound and a loud sound. It essentially just turns down the loudest sound, and then you can use gain to bring all of that back up. So when it's used correctly, this just helps the mix sound a lot more balanced and full. So the threshold knob is there to set the level where the compressor starts working. It's just saying, hey, any sound that goes above this line, start doing something. And that's where the ratio comes in. It's telling the compressor how hard to work once it goes over that line. At a 1-to-1 ratio, nothing happens. But if we turn the ratio up all the way, then all of the sound above this line will get turned down. But what do these numbers actually mean? Like a 2-to-1 ratio, what does that mean? Well, the first number is the input level, and the second number is the output level. So if the sound goes 2 decibels over the threshold, it'll spit out 1 decibel of output instead. And it's a ratio, so if a sound goes 10 decibels over the threshold, it'll output 5 decibels of volume instead. So that's still a 2-to-1 ratio. So at a ratio of 100-to-1, if there was a sound that was 100 decibels over the threshold, it would essentially get turned down to 1 decibel over the threshold. So at that point, you're pretty much just blocking out all sound above the threshold. And that's why at a 1-to-1 ratio, nothing's happening, because for every decibel a sound goes over the threshold, it's also just spitting out a decibel in return, so it's the same. So then we have the attack and release. The attack just sets how long it's going to take for the compressor to go from 0 to 100% once a sound goes above the threshold. So with no attack, it's just going to reduce the sound right away. But with a slower attack, you can make the transition more gradual. See right there, it's not really catching the transient of the snare, so it's doing way less compression on that snare. Then the release is just how fast or slow the compression stops working once the sound goes back below the threshold. And you also have this advanced feature called hold, which just holds the compression in between the attack and release time, and it can be really useful in certain situations. And because you're turning the loudest sounds down, the gain knob is always useful to turn everything back up. And now we should talk about the knee, which I think is the most underrated part of the compressor. It's kind of like a bonus attack feature that controls the transition from uncompressed sound to compressed sound. So I'll turn the ratio up so you can visualize this better. But with a hard knee, you're telling the compressor to start working immediately. So there's no transition at all. It just goes immediately from uncompressed, then it lets the compressor start working. Then you can actually see with a soft knee, the compressor actually starts working before the sound even crosses the threshold. It just smooths everything out and makes it a little more gradual. And that can give you a little bit more of a natural sound on things like vocals, where you want the compression to be smoother and not as noticeable. Let's do a quick example with sidechain compression. You might wonder why sidechaining a bass to a kick drum never sounds as clean with a compressor as it does with like a volume shaping plugin. And that's because of the knee. When you're doing sidechain compression, you want the bass to duck right away, right when the kick hits. So I've sidechained this bass to the kick bus here. And that doesn't sound that smooth, because first you would want to turn the attack all the way down. What you really want is a hard knee, so the compression is really kicking in right when the kick hits, so it's completely ducking out of the way. You could even add a little hold here to make it almost the same shape as the volume shaping plugin. So now let's look at how to approach compressing different sounds. First of all, you should realize it's always an option just to not compress anything. You should think like, is this an emotional breakdown where I want more dynamics, or do I want to have a really big drop where everything's sounding nice and balanced? In this case, I'm working on the drop of the song, so I want everything to be nice and tight and balanced. So let's add some compression to this piano. So for pianos, I really like the initial attack sound of the piano. So I really want that transient to come through. So we can do that by making the knee hard over here, and then we'll let some of the transient of the piano through by making an attack time, like letting the first 30 milliseconds through before the compressor fully starts working. So that's overkill there, but you can really hear the initial transient when I overdo it. And because this piano is playing nice long chords, I kind of want the release to be more drawn out and slower. We can add a little bit of makeup gain. And let me just bypass this off and on so you can really hear the difference. The compressed piano just sounds so much more upfront, and I really love that initial transient hit that it's bringing out. Now let's add some compression to the vocal chops.
Go tell your lover. Go tell your lover, babe.
So for these vocal chops, I want the transition from uncompressed sound to compressed sound to be a little smoother. So let's go with a little bit of a softer knee down here. And we still want some of those initial transients of her voice coming through, so we can let some of those transients through with the attack here.
Go tell your lover. Go tell your lover, babe.
So right now the release is set to all the way fast, which we obviously don't want, so it's kind of just going up to the normal volume right away. But we don't want too slow of a release time either, because then the compressor is just like overlapping over all of the words.
Go tell your lover. Go tell your lover, babe.
We want the volume to be able to go back up a little bit in between those chops.
Go tell your lover. Go tell your lover, babe. Go tell your lover.
And it could sound a little more even if we actually add a little bit of hold to that too.
Go tell your lover. Go tell your lover, babe.
Now let's do one last example with the drum bus. So we don't want to over compress the drum bus because it makes it really noticeable right away. Like that's just totally killing the power from the kick and the clap, which are the loudest parts of this drum beat. So we're gonna make it more subtle, but we also really want those transients from the drum hits to come through and sound nice and tight. So we're gonna do a hard knee all the way left, and we're gonna let some attack through here. And I'm doing kind of a faster release time because I want the volume to be able to go back up in between the drum hits. So that's just like 3 decibels of compression, and it makes that drum beat sound so much more alive. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. Some exciting news though, I've got a new drum sample pack coming out that I've been working on for over a year, and it's gonna come out next week. So I'll keep you posted about that. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Go tell your lover.